The South African Union of Students has condemned the National Students Financial Aid Scheme for the way they've mishandled the payment of student allowances. The union says NSFAS have been disruptive in the way in which the scheme has failed in ensuring that students receive their allowance in time. The union further condemned the exorbitant fees and bank charges that are being charged to students by the service providers. Let's get more on this. The spokesperson for the union, Asive Dlanjwa, joins us for more on this. Well, a very good evening to you, Asive. Thanks very much for joining us, sir.
Good evening, Flo, and to you and your viewers and listeners. Thank you for having us.
You're most welcome. So let's talk then about this grievance that you have with what you're calling the defunding of university students, essentially.
Yes, I suppose we can start with that. Quite a number of students, thousands of them, and unfortunately up until today we have not been able to get the exact number from the scheme, have been since defunded by NSFAS. So we really and highly condemn this from the scheme for a few reasons. The first one is that no due diligence was undertaken. Although the scheme claims that this is based on the outcomes of the Special Investigative Unit's report on students that had been funded that should not have been funded. But our contention as the union is that there should have been due process and due diligence. One, to identify those students, but number two, to ensure that there's a process so that the students are able to make the necessary representations to the scheme. Yeah. Why was this important? Because we now realize that thousands of students were actually wrongfully defunded. How do we know that they had been wrongfully defunded? Because some of them, NSFAS claims that obviously they would have their parents earning more than 350,000, but some of them are orphans, literally orphans. They have no parents. Some of them, their parents have never worked a day in their lives, and when they had applied, NSFAS had asked for the requisite evidence. The students, for those of them who their parents do not work or they had been retrenched, they'd gone to SARS to get the IT 834s, etc. Yeah. Those that were supposed to get evidence from the social workers, they were able to, and all of those students have been defunded.
Yeah. Do you then agree with what the SASCO leader spoke to him, I think on Monday? What SASCO then said was that this actually seems more like a money laundering. Would you agree with that sort of train of thought, or your thought is different to what they are saying?
No, we agree with the sentiments of the South African Students' Congress, and we have been engaging regarding these issues. It really would seem almost something like that, because there was no due process, and where we all draw the line is that there should have been due process to ensure that, because I think in one of the interviews you had also with the president of SASCO, he would have mentioned that in any other circumstances, if someone had been receiving assistance or funding or even a loan or whatever, if there has been either a default or a breach of what to be, or of what should have been the contract, there's a responsibility to reach out to that person and say, based on our information, it seems that you're in breach of our contract, and the person would have to make the necessary representations so that you do not just take a blanket approach and you defund students. Right now, unfortunately, we are sitting with children of the poor and the working class, some of them, as I said, that who are orphans, who do not have the necessary funding. Yeah. So we have since agreed with us when we met with them that a process must ensue as soon as possible. All students who are defunded, irrespective of what NSFAS believes speculatively, they must all be contacted and they must all be allowed to make the necessary representations case by case.
What feedback was given to you? I mean, the SASCO leader also told me that, of course, there would be some engagements that would be happening, and that one of the things that you were looking forward to was, some of the service providers, in fact, being on the ground and helping the students physically. I mean, what feedback did you get in that regard when you were having these discussions that you talk about?
Okay, so that was on the defunding
Yeah.
of students,
Yeah.
and I suppose that was the conclusion. Now, moving on to the direct payment, as you mentioned, and we did meet with the service providers. So there were a few things we had to iron out and we had to agree on. The first one was regarding the charges. The students are being charged exorbitant charges, some of them up to 174, against the agreement which we had had with the scheme and the Department of Higher Education of a 12 Rand administration fee. They have been charging students exorbitantly. So we agreed that we demand that those be absolutely all scrapped, number one, and number two, that all students must receive their bank cards so that they do not have to incur further cost of having to transfer from their current NSFAS accounts to their other bank accounts. So those things we've agreed on. We've also agreed on the fact that all the service providers must dispatch staff to all institutions to ensure that they assist students with onboarding, so that they are able to receive the monies. And another issue that we're having why students are not getting their funds was that the onboarding process was being bottlenecked by institutions. What were they doing? They were withholding, and they're withholding registration data from NSFAS. Registration data is the data that proves that in fact the student is registered with a particular institution and they should receive their allowances. So we have also given the universities, we have communicated this to the department and also met with them on Sunday, that all universities were giving them no more than 72 hours to release that registration data so that students are being paid. So those are some of the interventions and some of the things that we agreed on. We are confident, based on our engagements and the commitments we have received, that within the next 72 hours, by the end of this week or by Monday, that at least 90% of students should be onboarded and their money should be transferred. The only thing that would be required for them would be to sign themselves up and actually withdraw that money.
Asive, so those threats of, I think you'd said that, well, SASCO had said that they would disrupt the learning program. Can we safely say now that that's off the cards?
No, we can't say that, unfortunately, because you see, there are several times where we have had agreements, we have reached agreements and concessions, either with the department or with NSFAS or with institutions. But some of them, in their natural and inherent mischievous nature, they go back on those. Because you take, for instance, with the direct payments, the things that now are being put in place are things that we had agreed on. We should not have been in the crisis that we're in. But because of that mischievousness of them, we find ourselves here. So in the event that that persists and they do not take us seriously and the agreements and the concessions which we have met, you can definitely be sure that when schools resume or universities resume in the next week and 2 weeks, you most probably will have a mass action being undertaken. So it is purely based on the fact that by the time the students come in, that is our demand, all NSFAS beneficiaries' monies must be there in their account. It must just be for them to withdraw. That is our demand. If that is met, then we should not have any crises. But based on their previous, as I say, inclination to be mischievous, we most probably would find ourselves in a protest action.